is your Classic Metal Show right here on the ClassicMetalShow.com. That is I hate to say it, but that's a very old song. That's the Little Angels with Broken Wings of an Angel from the album Don't Pray For Me, which, believe it or not, turns 30 in a month. And on the line right now is the vocalist of that, as well as the vocalist of the newer band, Wayward Sons. You probably know him from, Dio Disciples or Fastway or Gun or a lot of other bands. He is Toby Jepson. Toby, how are you, sir?
Hi, Chris. I'm great. Nice to be here.
Toby, it is very good to speak to you, man, and it's always good to get music from you. You know, you're one of those guys that, you never quite got the huge name recognition, but you have one of those recognizable voices that just stands out no matter what band you're in.
Oh, that's very kind. Very, very, very kind of you to say so. Well, massive compliments, and I've been in a few bands, haven't I? So I get it, man. Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I've been in this game 30 odd years, and like you say, I mean, I sort of I nearly fell over when you said it was 30 years since Don't Pray For Me, but it only seems like yesterday. And I guess, musicians, that's the way that we feel, is that you keep making music, you keep going. I'm a lifer. I've been here ever since I was a teenager, and I've got no intention of disappearing too soon. So I'm always just pleased when anyone's interested in listening to my music and wanting to talk to me. So I thank you for that, sir.
Oh, sure. Well, before we get into Wayward Sons, and we definitely will, but I'm just curious, for a guy that's been in it as long as you have, do you look at the bands that did not explode? And I'm pointing to Little Angels because I remember I was maybe 20. I'm 51 now, so I was roughly 20 years old when it came out, 20 whatever. And I just remember all that hype machine for it. It's the next Def Leppard. They're going to be bigger than Def Leppard. I remember everything was Def Leppard, and I never heard Def Leppard when I heard the record. But, I'm curious for you, when you look back at that time, are you like, damn, that should have been the band, or my Gun should have been the band, or do you just keep going?
Well, I mean, I think the thing with Little Angels is that we were a bunch of very young people. I mean,
Sure.
Our keyboard player was 16 years old when we signed that record deal, and we sort of went into it with our eyes completely wide open and our hearts, full and wanting it all to be fantastic. But of course, the record industry doesn't work like that. And
Right.
we signed to a major record label with big management and lots of money associated with the deal. But really, the reality is we were young kids who were still trying to find our way. And we certainly hadn't developed. I think enough, and we although we toured a lot in the UK, and but you try throwing five essentially very young men into the maelstrom that is the record industry on a worldwide scale, and it's not that easy to deal with, And I think also the record label didn't really know what to do with us. I think there was a lot of, like you say, an awful lot of hype. I mean, we released the first album, Don't Pray For Me, worldwide, and I remember we were over in the US playing with Yngwie Malmsteen, and the record came out, and it kind of just sort of disappeared, We never really got to the bottom of why. I think the record industry kind of lost its nerve, or maybe there was just other things going on. I don't know. And you kind of what happens is you as the artist, you're the last person to know, especially when there's kind of lots of other people in the whole process. And now with hindsight, I think, clearly, it's a very easy thing to say, isn't it? But I would have done things an awful lot different. I think we would have benefited from, a change of personnel in terms of management and people that we had around us. But you don't know those things whilst you're in it. And so all we're trying to do is make the best music we can and have the best ride we can. And we did our best. And I think you can gnash your teeth and pull your hair as much as you want. But the reality is there's a reason why these things work, and there's a reason why these things don't work in equal measure. And I'm just, I'm just happy to be here still making music and anyone really caring. And I think at the end of the day, for me to make it as a musician is about being able to wake up every morning and call myself a musician and make a living out of it. And that's the way I look at it. And everything else is a bonus, especially in this day and age of social media and the enormity of the internet and what that's done to our industry. I'm just happy to be making music,
Sure, definitely. Well, you're making some great music. You have a brand new release from your band, Wayward Sons. The name of the record is The Truth Ain't What It Used to Be. I got to tell you, Toby, as somebody that heard the first record and liked the first record, This one seems to have just a lot of growth. It seems like, not that it's a change up or something or a new style or anything, but it just seems like it's a record that's maybe a lot more deeper or a lot more personal or something. It just feels like a bigger, stronger record. Is that how you see it?
I think that's a very fair assessment. I think, when you're in a band, especially given the fact that, this is my sort of second bite of the cherry in many, many ways. Little Angels was my first, and I never really anticipated, 3 or 4 years ago when I first put this band together and I started working on the first album, it was a suck it and see situation. I was really inspired, but I had no sort of sense of entitlement. I didn't believe that I ought to be a big artist and all this. I just wanted to make some music and see what happened, and I wanted to work with some cool people, and that was the premise. We set out with that approach, and we wrote those songs and we made that first album, and I was really, really pleased with it. And then of course I was faced with, there was we critically it was really well received, and we started getting lots of gigs, and we were touring with a lot of bands over here, and all of a sudden it was like something different. It was like, hang on a minute, this could really work. Maybe there is something in this, and so I kind of was faced with that sort of thing that you have when you're in a band, that on your second record. I mean, I'd put all my efforts into the first album, and I didn't really know. I'll be honest with you, I didn't really know whether we would make a second record. I hoped we would, but of course it's all dictated by different terms. You don't. If the record hadn't been successful or people hadn't liked it, then maybe I wouldn't be having this conversation with you today. But thankfully, it was, and I had to sit down and go, okay, what do I do now? What do I write about now? And so I found myself in this position once before with the Little Angels when we made the second record, Young Gods, and I remember it was a very similar feeling. I had to basically start to think, okay, what have I got to say? What do I want to talk about? Where do I want to go with this? And once I sort of opened those floodgates, I ended up writing about 50-odd songs, 56 songs I think I did for this album, over a course of about a year. And I know that sounds like an enormous amount of music, but the thing is, that's what has to happen, really. You have to sort of let it filter down and start to understand what your narrative is and what you're trying to say. But like I say, once the floodgates opened, I couldn't stop writing. And so I kind of went into this album with the band. And so I said, look, guys, I've got all these songs because I'm the principal writer. And we sifted through them all. And eventually we started to uncover a kind of narrative thread, which was really a conversation about the state of the planet as we are right now. I think it's very easy to see once people hear this record that it's an album of protest. It's an album that wants to talk about and raise the conversation about where we are as a species. What are we doing to ourselves? What are we doing to the planet? Et cetera, et cetera. And I make no apology for that. I think we're in extraordinary times right now, and I want these conversations to be had. And I think music's always been a very, very fertile ground for these conversations. There's been many examples of music being the catalyst for change, and not that I'm suggesting for 1 second I could be, the start of any movement or anything, but I certainly want to take part in the conversation. I want to talk about things that really matter. And so once I kind of got my hands around that, it felt like a bigger, broader canvas, and it was a lot more. There was a lot more intent there, and I think the results are what we put on the record. It is quite deep. It is quite challenging in places, but also, I want to make a record that entertains people as well. So I hope that's what people get off this record.
Well, they should if they listen. It's one of those records, Toby, that you can listen to either way. You can really listen to it surface level and never dig into it and be like, all right, yeah, that was a cool rockin' record, and it has its ebbs and flows to it, whether it's Any Other Way, which is rockin', or whether it's Fade Away, the traditional ballad, I guess. I mean, you could listen to it that way, or you can dig into songs like If Only God Was Real and really see that there's a lot more substance and a lot more, I'm going to call it, challenges to the listener to either agree or disagree, but at least feel what you're trying to say.
Absolutely, and that's my intention. I genuinely believe that as artists we have a responsibility to talk about the things that are going on around us. I mean, I was never, as much as I loved, say, like a band like Motley Crue. I absolutely loved Motley Crue, but they were not a band that I would ever think that had a deep message. You know what I mean? And as a result of that, they weren't a band that I would hold up as one of my favorite acts. But then I look at something like, I don't know, take Led Zeppelin as a good example. Led Zeppelin had layers, didn't they? And it was you in the same way that you're talking about now. You could listen to a Led Zeppelin song in many ways, and those are the kind of artists and the records that I listen to. I mean, David Bowie's my ultimate hero, really.
Okay.
And you take any of those albums, especially the early stuff. Say take Hunky Dory for example, is a good example of an album that has that same feeling. You could look at something like Changes or 8-line poem, and you could read into anything you want there, or you can just listen to it as a beautiful piece of composition. And I think that's the challenge as a composer and as a songwriter these days. Well, of any era really, but certainly now I think of these days, because there's so much more challenging is out there. The sort of social conditions of the world and the politics and all the rest of it. There's a lot for people to kind of get their heads around, and I want to take part in that conversation. And like you so rightly say, if you don't want to. I also want to make a record that people can just like because it just makes them feel good, or they just like the sound of it or whatever. But ultimately, I do feel it's a responsibility to talk about things that are happening around me.
Let me ask you this question based on that, though. Do you think that the talk from an artist, whether it's an actor, a musician, whatever, should be limited to just to the music, because that's, kind of what people are I don't know, paying for more or less to get the message from? Or do you think it's an artist's responsibility to go out in the press and say, I don't know, Trump sucks or Trump's great or whatever political statement that is wanted to be made?
Okay, so here's the thing. I'm not a politician, and I wouldn't ever pretend to be, but I am a human being, obviously, and I've got a right as anyone else to talk about these things. And I think art in general, be it painting, be it poetry, be it a Stephen King novel, be it I don't know, James Cameron movie, whatever. There are all kinds of ways of looking at these things, and I think there's messages in all of these, all of the way we demonstrate ourselves. My take on this whole thing is that I've got a right to say these things too, and I want to hold a conversation. And even if you don't want to agree with me, we can agree to disagree, and we can. But at least we might stimulate the conversation. We can talk about these things. I do think there's many examples in rock and roll where the music has been all of these things. I mean, you only have to look at Creedence Clearwater Revival as a good example, or Bob Dylan as the best example in many ways of a beatnik poet turning his music turning to music, but talking about what was happening on the streets and how the social conditions of the time were affecting us all, and it being a rallying cry to everybody. Now, that would be wrong if the music was awful, but the music wasn't awful, was it? It was wonderful music and great composition. So I think it's multifaceted. I think that I'm not trying to tell anyone anything. I'm not trying to insist that I'm right. What I'm trying to do is hold a conversation and take part in the world drama. And I think there is a place for that. But at the same time, like I say, I want to go out there and play rock and roll shows and have people turn up and just enjoy it for what it is. But there's a deeper level there that if you want to examine it. And I'm certainly not shy of talking about my opinion, and I will stand up for my beliefs in the same way as anyone else would stand up for their beliefs. And I would hope so. I would hope anyone felt like that, if you know what I mean. So. Sure. Yeah, I'm not a politician, but I'm certainly a commentator. Put it that way.
Right. The only sad part about that, Toby, is that when you take it to the Twitterverse or the Facebook or wherever, nobody else is willing to just have the conversation anymore. It's just everybody just wants to argue. But this is the world we live in, and I think that shouldn't stop anyone from saying stuff. And I think a massive part of what this record is about this kind of this crazy world we seem to have entered now, which is like the post-truth generation. I mean, what the hell is that? Right. I don't even know what that is. There's no common sense. There's no critical thought there. You can't just decide something isn't true just because you decide it isn't true. And this is what this record's about. It's the search for truth. It's the search for defining what truth is about. And we've all got to take responsibility for that. It's no good just saying, hang on, I'm going to decide something isn't right just because I think it isn't right. There has to be critical thought. We have to get back to analysis. We have to get back to being common sense and conversation and people, and not have this sort of situation where everyone's up against everybody else. That is not progressive thought. That's not progressive for us as a species and as a people. We need to start holding sympathetic conversations about our plight and how we all interact and how we all survive with each other. And I think art has always been at the forefront of that. I mean, there's many examples of that. And in my own tiny little way, I hope that I can help
drive that conversation. And you know what? Twitter and Facebook, it doesn't scare me. Because actually, it's an empty vessel. Anyone can sit behind a screen and say anything. It's another thing when you have to stand up for it.
Right. No, you're 1,000% right. We talk about this all the time on the show about just how, there's all the talk about the 1200s or 1300s, whatever it was, with the plague. And in my mind, the biggest plague that we have right now is social media, just because it has literally convinced people to no longer think and adapt to thought. And Toby, me and you are roughly the same age. You remember back in the day, you didn't agree with everything everybody was saying, and you would have a conversation. You'd have a conversation, and you would either just avoid those topics, or you would the standard line. Okay, let's just agree to disagree and move on to something else. We
absolutely, and this is the biggest problem, is that the trouble is the internet has become a soapbox for everybody,
right?
And that's fine. Actually, there's lots of very, very positive things about the fact that communication has been blown open, and everyone can hold a conversation. But the trouble is, just because we can doesn't mean to say we should. And half the time, the information's incorrect. And it's becoming blurred. But I think that in itself has become a real challenge for everybody, because the whole idea of fake news and all this nonsense that we get that gets bandied around all the time by various people is ridiculous to me. I think that if you sit down and have a conversation with somebody, it's very easy to understand, isn't it, where the right and wrong exist, because actually we're all facing it. And so the conversation has to be, we have to take responsibility for the things that we say and we do, and that's where it stops and starts. And hiding behind a screen doesn't help anyone.
Right. No, I totally agree. You might as well be preaching it as if I was saying it, man.
Good stuff.
Yeah, no kidding, man. Well, Toby, let's talk a little bit about the business itself. It's obviously a very, very different monster in 2019. What do you think of all of the way music is consumed today, whether it's streaming services or on phones, and, lack of, I don't want to say the lack of collectability, but the lack of people our age teaching our kids to appreciate music, to where I honestly think that has killed the industry every bit as much as a Napster or illegal downloading, because young kids, I have nieces and nephews that are young and kids that are young. When I pull out my CD books or my albums or whatever and show them and say, oh yeah, I used to read these liner notes or whatever, they completely don't understand what I'm talking about. And I honestly think that lack of passion toward music is every bit as much guilty of killing the industry as any kind of illegal downloading or anything else.
I couldn't agree more. But I think there's a caveat there as well. I think that the reality is that we know where we are with this whole thing right now. It's white noise. There is right. There's so much music. There's more music than there's ever been before, that it's almost impenetrable. It's very, very, very hard to see through it. I work as a record producer, as well as working, as a singer in Wayward Sons and a songwriter. And I see this at first hand, is that the reality is, just because you can make music really easily doesn't mean to say that music is very good. And I think that here's the thing. Back in the day, when I was sort of starting out with Little Angels in the northeast of England, the best you could possibly hope for is playing some local shows, going into a local recording studio, and if you could afford it, right, and making a tape and taking it out on the road and selling those tapes to your fans. And then maybe the best you could hope for is that someone might come across that, and there's the slim possibility you might get a record deal. Now, nobody needs a record deal. Everyone can record through Pro Tools or any DAWs platform and create reasonably sounding music. But here's the thing, and this is where herein lies the rub. It's still really difficult to write a great song. It's quite easy to write a song, but it's not easy to write a great song. And so I think the biggest problem is that there's just too much music. There's
Sure.
too much out there. There is no gatekeepers anymore, and that's what the record industry was. The record labels were the gatekeepers in many, many ways, because it took such a lot of effort to get through that cordon and get through that firewall and eventually end up with a deal. And you had to be absolutely killer to be able to get into that situation. These days, anyone can release anything at any point, any time, and this is compounded the problem. In terms of the releasing things, I actually don't care how people hear music. I just want people to hear music. But again, I think it's a quality control thing. And the interesting thing that's happening in the UK at the moment is we're having an enormous uptake, a massive resurgence of vinyl over here. Mm-hmm. It's really, really popular to the point where it's taking over from, they reckon it's going to take over from CD sales this next coming 18 months or so, which is extraordinary to hear people say that. But what's been very interesting is that all the bands over here, all the major bands, Coldplay, all the huge radio acts over here are releasing their albums on vinyl and making a point of it. We've even got HMV Records, which nearly bit the dust a couple of months ago, got rescued by a Canadian guy, actually, who bought the company. And he's turning over all of the HMV stores in the UK specifically to sell vinyl. Now, how about that? So there is a kind of green shoots there, and I think a lot of the reason why people like it is because it is a tactile thing. People are starting to realise again, and my kids, have realised this. You can hold on to an album, you can look at the art, you can pull open that sleeve. It's a novelty to them. They think it's something new. Now I'm saying, hang on, I used to do this when I was 17, 18 years old, and I had an enormous record collection, blah blah blah. Now I don't think we'll ever get back to that. Right. But I do think that human beings inherently like to have things and like to hold things and like to take part in things. And what I'm hoping, and maybe I'm just pie in the sky, maybe I'm just being too romantic about this, but I do hope that people are starting to turn back in some respects to trying to figure out why they like things and how they can enjoy things a bit more without it just being so instant. Because there's the other thing. The biggest problem is the instant nature of music these days. You're lucky if you get anyone to listen to a piece of music for more than 2 or 3 seconds before they move it on to something else, Right. So the challenge has got to be, how do we re-engage people with music? Well, the industry's got a lot to answer for that. I mean, they don't inwardly invest in bands. I mean, where are the next headliners going to come from? I mean, we have Download Festival over here every year. Right. And Andy Coppin's a very good friend of mine. And he's always saying to me, where am I going to get my next headliners? Where's the next Metallica going to come from? Where's the next Kiss going to come from? Where's the next Iron Maiden going to come from? Well, it's not going to come from anywhere unless the record industry recognize they need to develop acts over long periods of time and allow them to develop into something. Otherwise, we're just going to end up with a bunch of small bands that can't gather enough of an audience to sell enough tickets to generate a groundswell of support. So I think we're going through a massive recalibration right now. But all we can do as artists, and all you can do as a guy who's into music just like me, is to continue to support the best music that you can find, and continue to wave that flag from the highest flagpole you possibly can, because that's really what it comes down to. I still believe in the positivity of fantastic music being able to break through. I still do believe the cream rises to the top if you are willing to work hard enough. And I think, look at any band from the past. It takes bands, it took bands 10, 15 years to really break through, if you think about it, to really crack the market and really to crack an audience and be able to build a huge audience. And it doesn't happen overnight. And I think the biggest problem is a lot of the young bands expect it to happen overnight because they're in the instant culture. This is what it's all about. I want it now. And I don't think that really will fly. I think we have to expect these things to take time. So we've got to get back to that if we've got any chance of surviving.
Right. Yeah, and it is amazing when you look back at it. A band, one of the biggest bands in history, Journey, and whether you like Journey or hate Journey, they had 4 albums that didn't sell anything. 4.
I know.
You would never have that today. 4 albums, you'd be broke up and washing dishes or something.
I couldn't agree more. And I often sort of think, I was having a conversation the other day with someone, and we sort of saying, can you imagine if David Bowie appeared now? Let's put a David Bowie aside for all of the beautiful work that he's created over his career. If he appeared now, it's unlikely he would get signed. And if he did get signed, you'd have an opportunity to make one record, might even just be one song if it was a major label. And then it'd be like, well, if it hasn't broken, if it hasn't immediately hit, then you're out the door. Now, therein lies the problem. So there is a kind of, I think, say for instance, like the deal that I got with Frontiers Music, from Italy. This is what always gets me. I'm British. and the label I end up signing to is not a British label, it's an Italian label.
Right.
You know, they're one of the very few labels that are going around the globe and trying to support young music, or new music at the very least. I mean, I'm not young, of course, but new music. And they are trying their hardest to bring new music forward in their own way. And again, I think I look back at the period of you know, post-punk, the post-punk explosion in the UK, when Stiff Records and all those great IRS records all appeared. They were homegrown grassroots labels that took chances on bands. And maybe we're seeing that again. And maybe that's what this record industry needs to be. It needs to be shaken up by some new people that can realise that the old model isn't an old model. It's just a good model. And what that model needs to be is to develop bands and allow them to become the people they possibly can be over time. And that's what I like about, say, for instance, like Frontiers, because they've been incredibly respectful to me. They've allowed me just to make the music I want to, and they've trusted me to do that. And as a result of it, I've been able to be free in my art and create what I wanted to create. Now, whether it becomes a success is anyone's guess at the moment, but it's the best chance I've got.
Sure. Well, let's give the fans a chance to hear some of this great music. The name of the album is The Truth Ain't What It Used to Be. It is Wayward Sons. And Toby, why don't you pick a song from the record and maybe tell us a quick story about it to wrap this interview up?
Okay, mate. Okay, I'd like to suggest you play... Now, which one should I say? I think probably Fade Away, actually. I think Fade Away is the pivotal song on the record. It was a song, actually, funnily enough, I wrote almost 20 years ago and rediscovered and reinvented for this band. And we tried it on the first album, and it didn't quite work. And I think this also ties into the stuff I've just been talking about. We didn't really know each other well enough by that point, so we'd only just started working with each other. But then 18 months, 2 years on the road, we all got to know each other very, very well indeed. And we started to sort of, you know, discover that we all had very, very similar tastes in music, obviously. And we wanted to talk about this very similar things. And so when we started working on this album, Fade Away became a real pivotal moment for us. And I think it kind of defines the message, and it defines certainly a future direction for the band, that we're willing to have a wider, sort of more glorious palette. And it's the backbone of the record, I think.
All right, well, let's check it out right now. It is Fade Away. It's the Wayward Sons right here on your Classic Metal Show.